Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Scotland at 7. First, apologies for being so late on this evening. We've had some technical difficulties, but we've got them sorted out now. Joining me this evening to discuss the main headlines tonight, I have with me Chris McCusker, who is a well-known regular on the show. Hi again, Chris. Welcome back.
Evening, Gordon.
And also joining us this evening, James Dornan, MSP for Glasgow Cathcart. Welcome back to the show, James.
Hi, Gordon.
Okay, now we've got some big news to talk about tonight, gentlemen, but before we do that, I need to crack on with the coronavirus update. And as of 2 o'clock today, a total of 355,898 people in Scotland have now been tested through NHS Scotland labs and the UK government's regional testing centres. Now, of these, 337,301 were confirmed negative. 18,597 were positive. There are now 7 new confirmed cases of COVID-19. There are 0 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive today. Now, this will be an underestimate of the number of cases. Not everyone with the virus displays the symptoms, and not all of those with symptoms will be tested. Of the people who have tested positive, 260 were in hospital last night, 2 of whom were in intensive care. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus COVID-19 infection remains at 2,491. This number only includes those who have died in hospital having received a positive test for the virus. The latest UK figures available show that 45,999 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 38. This number refers to deaths in all settings and not just hospitals. Now, just before we crack on with tonight's programme, I'd just like to remind you that you can, of course, take part in the programme by sending us Twitter messages all the way through the show. So if you would like to interact with us, please do so using the hashtag Scotland at 7. Anyway, tonight's main headlines. Jackson Carlaw has resigned suddenly as the Scottish Conservative leader, claiming that he is not the right person to lead his party into the forthcoming Holyrood elections. Just hours after a lesson in politics at the hands of the First Minister, Carlaw issued a statement saying that he had reached a simple, if painful, conclusion over the last few weeks, that the Scottish Tories needed a new and better leader. Over the summer, I have had the chance to think hard about my role as leader of the Scottish Conservatives. Nothing is more important to me than making the case for Scotland's place in the United Kingdom. I believe the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party is the most important voice in Scotland for setting out that positive argument. I am clear that nothing must get in the way of doing so. In the past few weeks, I have reached a simple, if painful, conclusion that I am not, in the present circumstances, the person best placed to lead the case over these next vital months in Scottish politics, prior to the Holyrood elections. Given the importance I attach to the job, I have therefore decided to stand down with immediate effect. It's not an easy call, but I have spent a lifetime in politics holding to the maxim that party and country comes first. I believe I am doing my duty by holding to that view now. Now, James, if I might come to you first of all this evening, because I know that you are obviously very well aware of this fact. What do you make of the suddenness of Jackson Carlaw's departure today? I don't think anyone was expecting this.
No, I don't think they were, but to be honest, his performance today was so unlike him. I mean, don't get me wrong, he's been very poor for a while. And you've seen him, he's lowered his standards as has been requested, I think, by his colleagues down south. But today, as the First Minister quite rightly said, he just refused to acknowledge that the people of Scotland were doing well, the health service was coping as best they could, that the difference between what's going on here and elsewhere is huge. And it just looked so petty and political, and the doing that the First Minister gave him was something he wouldn't want to repeat. But I reckon there's been pressure put on him over the summer to consider his position. He came back today, saw that he's not going to get any better, and decided that enough was enough.
So you think that basically he's just decided to go really before he is edged out by his own party?
Yes, probably. I think the timing it might be of his making, but I think the decision was somebody else's. I don't think he's a good performer. He's a great after dinner speaker, and he can make some funny speeches in the chamber. But FMQs is not for him. If he can't get to ask the second question, he get written down. He starts to flounder. And when you're up against somebody like Carlaw, the First Minister, you have to be able to think on your feet. Having said that, who is there?
Yeah. Chris, if I could bring you in at this point. Now, I listened to Jackson Carlaw's performance this afternoon, and it was pretty poor. I mean, he was at one point haranguing the First Minister about face masks and claiming that the SNP was profiteering from mask production. I mean, that he really seemed to be reaching for anything new to say.
It was absolutely woeful, and I actually had an exchange on Twitter with James regarding it. We were obviously watching it at the same time, and this is the level I've got to put up with an elected MSP. So that maybe give the whole of Scotland an insight into the how the constituents of Eastwood feel with that shoddy performance. And you know, it would be easy for me to attack Jackson and stuff like that. I could bring up his car sales, Arthur Daly, and
yes, that's been done many times.
But what the bonus for me is, from a constituency point, is who is going to vote for someone who lasted only 5 months in the job and was basically forced to resign because he was such a poor and ineffective leader. I'm hearing that I think it was Douglas Ross has been mentioned.
The famous referee.
Yeah. He's the MP for Murray at the moment.
Yeah.
And Jackson indicated that the party needs a more youthful approach.
I think that's certainly true.
Well, they certainly wouldn't get that with Annie Wells, that's for sure.
Well, I seem to remember, Chris, in the old days, Chris, the party used to be known, certainly in Scotland, as the Blue Rinse Party.
Well, there's certain football jokes that we could start kicking off.
Oh, let's not go there, Chris. Let's not go there. James, I know you're sitting listening to Chris here, and I dare say you two have probably already talked about this issue of Mr. Carlaw. Is it likely, I'm guessing, that Annie Wells will have to step in to take Mr. Carlaw's place? Would that be the normal procedure now?
Yeah, it would be the normal procedure, but I suspect that there'll be all sorts of moves to make sure that it doesn't happen. Certainly if it comes to a case of First Minister's questions, the idea of Annie standing up against Nicola and trying to bring her down in any way is farcical. Farcical. You can see them calling for Jackson back immediately.
It seems like the Scottish Tory party is like a football team without a striker at the moment.
And a captain and a centre half and a goalkeeper.
Okay, what does this mean, do you think? Chris, if I come to you just for a second, how do you think this is going to affect the upcoming parliamentary elections for Holyrood next May? Is this going to put a major crimp in the Tories' plans for how they're going to fight this next general election?
Well, again, as I earlier spoke about, from my constituency point of view, James will know it well because our constituencies share the border. But honestly, he has brought nothing to the table for Eastwood. East Rend Council is run by an SNP and Labour coalition. So he's got very, very little influence as to what he can suggest. that happens within the constituency. He's also very, how can we say, absent within the constituency as well.
Does he not do many surgeries, Chris?
Well, if he does, they're obviously done at the White Craigs Tennis and Lawn Club. He is very, very...
He does more surgeries than his predecessor.
Okay, well listen, because we're running a little bit late, gentlemen, I would like to move on to some of the First Minister's statement today as well. Okay, I think there are some other machinations going on in the Conservative Party at the moment. I'm hearing something about Murdo Fraser being involved. Anyway, listen, until I can hear a little better what's going on, I will... Okay, James, what I'm being asked here is, do you think that it's now Murdo Fraser's turn to have a go at steering the Conservative ship?
I think that the plan for poor Murdo is that they bypass him and they go straight to one of these younger, more dynamic people that they're going to have to invent between now and the process. I really don't know who would... I mean, Douglas Ross has been talked about. Douglas Ross, as an MSP, was quite a disgrace. He spent more time training for games than he did attending Parliament. So I just can't see him as being a good leader. He may well get the position, but I don't think it's going to be Murdo. I think it's going to be somebody that they're going to try and force in and make.
A fresh young face again, a little bit like when Ruth Davidson was leading the party, a younger, more dynamic person with a bit of, perhaps a teaspoonful of charisma.
That nobody knows about.
Well, listen, I would love to sit here and discuss the intricacies of who the Tories will choose, but unfortunately we need to move on this evening. And our next story is, of course, the First Minister's speech today, our statement on the next steps out of COVID. The First Minister told MSPs today, on the 30th of July, that Scotland would remain in Phase 3 of the route map out of lockdown due to the fragile position the country faces. The two sets of indicative dates have been announced for sectors that remain shut as a vital part of the country's public health measures in tackling COVID-19. And these indicative dates are contingent on continued suppression of the virus. Reopening dates for indoor gyms, swimming pools, sports courts, including dance schools, will be reviewed in 3 weeks to see if they can be brought forward. During a statement to Parliament, the First Minister also confirmed that shielding advice will officially pause from Saturday, the 1st of August, meaning that those who have been shielding to protect themselves can now follow the advice set out for the general public. Routine eye care services can resume within the community optometry practices and patients' own homes from Monday, the 3rd of August. And urgent dental care involving aerosols may begin in practices for NHS patients from the 17th of August. And although it's not in my script, I would also like to point out that driving instructors are not going back until at least the 24th of August. Anyway, James, if I could come to you first for a response to this. Now, this is a very cautious approach to coming out of the lockdown. Why is the First Minister taking it so slowly at the moment? What's the reason why she's being so careful, do you think?
I think there's a number of reasons. One is that we've been careful all the way through it. The First Minister's handled this very carefully and cautiously and correctly. And we see that in the figures. We see that thankfully there's not been one death in the last 2 weeks in the daily figures that have been definitely COVID, and that's down to the work that the people of Scotland have done and the cautious approach that the government has taken. Now, I think that there's a bit of concern about the fact that we've opened up social venues, the pubs and cafes and stuff. People look to be wearing masks in the shops and that, but there must be some concern that there'll be some knockback from that, some fallout from that. So I think that the government are trying to err on the side of caution trying to make sure that the schools get back, because it's important that our children get back to their education as soon as it's safe and secure.
Well,
I think that's just a priority.
yeah, we'll come to education actually in our next item. Chris, before we leave the subject of coming out of lockdown at such a slow pace, I noticed today that Murdo Fraser asked the First Minister why churches and places of worship were coming out of lockdown more slowly, why they were limited to 50 people. And the First Minister indicated there was some sort of special circumstances. I'm guessing that's something to do with things like chanting and singing, where there is a much greater prevalence of particles in the air. Do you know anything about that?
Well, I only know anecdotally, shall I say, because I obviously reserved my chanting and singing for 3 o'clock in the Saturday afternoon at Parkhead. So, but it is obviously questionable, and not wishing to sound controversial or anything like that. But
what you know, controversial?
Well, one of the churches in my constituency, St Joseph's Roman Catholic Church, it can hold 350 people at full capacity.
Yeah.
So 50 is slightly questionable. But then if that's I fully trust the First Minister in being guided by the science and also by the WHO. And if it means that services have to continue at a reduced capacity, then services need to continue at a reduced capacity.
Fair enough.
At the end of the day, the evidence shows the fact that because we're not gung-ho as England does, then we're actually doing better than England.
Yes,
so when
something Mr. Carlaw had great trouble believing during his performance today in First Minister's questions.
Well, correct. Do you know what I mean? And I was when I was watching that after Jackson got his backside handed on a plate, I was looking forward to Murdo getting his rear end put on a salver as well, but the First Minister's better than that, and she was able to put him down with clear facts, and so
it wasn't. I don't think Mr. Fraser's question was that combative anyway. However, I need to move the subject on a little bit further, gentlemen. So we're going to talk now about the schools and when they will reopen. Now, according to the First Minister's statement today, schools will reopen full-time from the 11th of August following scientific evidence and advice that it's safe to do so. New guidance developed with the Education Recovery Group has been published to support local authorities, teachers and parents to prepare for the new term and to minimise the risks of COVID-19 transmission through the application of a number of infection mitigation measures. Now, school staff will need to physically distance from each other and, where possible, from children and young people who are not part of the same household. For the majority of staff in schools, personal protective equipment will not be necessary, but guidelines make it clear that there are exceptions to this position. In addition to Test and Protect, Scotland's Test, Trace, Isolate, Support strategy, a surveillance programme is being developed for schools, where regular testing and survey data will identify symptoms and infections in the school population. This will allow regular reporting on incidences of infection and inform the ongoing development of guidance for schools. The First Minister has also announced the return to schools will be supported with an additional £30 million to recruit new teachers. This brings the total additional Scottish Government investment in the teaching profession to £75 million, enough to recruit up to 1,400 new teachers. This funding will help to address learning loss and ensure much needed resilience in our schools as we recover from the coronavirus. On top of £20 million of funding previously committed, a further £30 million will also be available as part of a £50 million education recovery fund for local authorities. This will support cleaning, facilities management, school transport and other practical issues that are vital to ensure the safe return to school. If I come to you first, James, on this one. Now, this is quite a complex matter, bringing children back to school. I can see from the detail in this that there's been a great deal of trouble has been gone to protect children, including, I notice, this testing. And this seems to be a new addition. Is this something that is a recent addition?
As far as we can see, it is, but it's a very useful addition because, as I said earlier on, it's important that we get children back to school, that they start the learning process, they start to be able to socialise with their friends, etc. But obviously we want to make sure at the same time that they're safe, that their families are safe, that the teachers and staff are safe. So we want to see the testing in place along with all the necessary safety measures that go along with that. Now, they're giving the schools a wee while, an extra week, to make sure that they're up to full strength, that the classes come in full strength after a week, and I think that's the right thing to do. But this is a big step, but it's an important step, and it looks like local authorities, COSLA and others are on board with it, although I know there's some teachers have still got concerns.
Yeah, okay. Listen, thanks for that. Chris, if I could turn to you now. Now, it has been said by, many experts, or I've observed at least, that the COVID-19 virus does not seem to be attacking the younger demographic in the same way that it is attacking the older generation. And do you think that maybe this has had some influence on how the children are going back to school, the fact that they now feel that they know enough about the virus?
Well, I think partly that may be the case, but again, I think it's also partly down to the fact that because we have been going at a slower rate than England, we've been able to get the schools back with a certain degree of confidence, although the First Minister would rightly say that she's got a bit of trepidation regarding it.
I mean, children are I was going to say parents are particularly scared of the virus, especially those with young children. I can appreciate that as a parent myself. I think we'd all be worried about that. Yeah,
but not just from the kids' point of view, as you quite rightly point out, the demographics and teachers, is obviously, I would probably say it's top heavy on the 35 plus age bracket. But again, this has been done, and the viewers will be fed up with me pointing this out, but this has been done in agreement with the teaching unions. I note that Larry Flanagan is constantly on the television. Basically.
Because it needs joined up thinking, doesn't it, Chris, to achieve something on this scale? So the unions would have to be involved.
Well, again, yes, because when you think about it logically, excuse me, it has to take in a certain amount of health and safety. And when you're talking about health and safety, you're then talking about engaging, obviously, with the unions, working in conjunction with COSLA and the various unions that represent the ancillary staff, the support staff, and the staff that are involved within the
it's
school
a complicated business, isn't it?
So after all that is taken on board, you've obviously got each school will do their own individual risk assessment in conjunction with the teaching unions, and then they will then go back to their representatives and hopefully give them a bit of reassurance, the fact that the school has been
as made as safe as possible,
kitted out as safely as possible. But the one thing that I do want to point out is the fact that whilst this fantastic additional extra money was mentioned by the First Minister,
Yeah.
Again, you see the likes of Scottish Labour, particularly Ian Gray. You know, he obviously went to the same grievance school of politics as Jackson Carlaw, because they are the only ones that could actually moan about the fact that the Scottish Government are taking on extra staff and putting extra money into education. And you can quite clearly see that the First Minister's nose was completely out of place because of the sheer
I get it. Yeah.
grievance within the body politic,
Okay.
and not actually concentrating on the one main thing, which is the preservation of life at this
Yeah, the
moment
safety
in
of the
time.
children, isn't it, Chris? Listen, Chris, I'll need to stop you there. We have to move on, I'm afraid, because we are running a little bit late this evening. And our next story is moving away now from the coronavirus and to something completely different. The Parliament today was briefed on the risks of the UK internal market. The Constitution Secretary, Michael Russell, today set out how the UK government plans for a UK internal market will weaken the ability of the Scottish Parliament to make distinctive laws and to protect Scottish interests. In a statement to Holyrood, Mr Russell called on MSPs to defend devolution from any attempt to remove power from the Scottish Parliament without its consent and against the wishes of the people of Scotland. Mr Russell said the UK government says it wants to take back control from the EU, but it's now clear it wants to take back control from Scotland too. Companies with deep pockets will be likely to try to challenge any Scottish parliamentary law which they say impedes their ability to trade across the UK. And it will mean the UK Parliament effectively imposing standards in devolved policy areas, regardless of the wishes of the people of Scotland and laws passed by the Scottish Parliament. Now, I think, James, I want to go to you on this one first of all. Mike Russell, a very experienced and knowledgeable politician, and he's making, I think, a very strong point that the Scottish Government is not going to sit around and let the Conservative Party in London wish away devolution so they can control things up here.
Yes, well, if you heard Mike's statement today, it was brilliantly delivered as always, and it was very, very powerful, because the fact is this is an incredibly important issue. This is another chipping away at the devolution process by this right-wing centralising government. And I think that one of the things that was very noticeable today was that the Labour Party seemed to be supporting our position, obviously with the caveats that
yes, this is true,
independence, etc. But they seem to be supporting our position, which shows that this is not a unified unionist position. It's very much a conservative Boris Johnson, Dominic Cummings, Michael Gove position. And we have to fight it with everything that we have in our power. And so do the people of Scotland, and so does the rest of the Parliament.
Well, I noticed, James, that Mike Russell was very combative in his tone, and this is actually uncharacteristic for Mike. I've met the man, and he's usually a placid, amiable man, and to hear him saying that the Scottish Parliament was not going to take this and was going to fight it tooth and nail, it gave me at least an idea of how seriously the Scottish Government has to take this threat.
Yeah, I mean, the Tories are doing what Tories do. They are being underhand in the way that they're dealing with this. They're pretending, they're talking about no powers leaving the Scottish Parliament, but what they're not talking about is the actions that they're taking are going to make some of those powers useless. Because, as if you remember, when the smoking ban came in, we had the tobacco lobbies take us to court. When we talked about minimum unit pricing, we had the alcohol lobby take us to court. And the same thing will happen, and they'll have a bigger case because they'd be able to go to the example of what's happening on the other side of the border. So this is a disaster for Scotland if it goes through, and it shows that down south they are not caring one jot about what happens to the people of Scotland or any other part of the United Kingdom except for England. Okay,
Chris, your reaction to this new, what would you call it, a wheeze from the British government on how to circumvent devolution in some new and interesting way?
It's interesting that you use the word wheeze because this is a government, as far as I can see, who are run by the Tory elite, who are acting like they have literally just left Eton last week and are treating the whole issue, the internal market, Brexit, everything. They are just treating it as a jolly wheeze.
Yeah.
Won't it be spiffing if we can inflict this, that, and the next thing? This is a government. This is a government who, would set a £50 note alight in front of a homeless person. So I mean, I have, I equally share James's analysis on the situation. The fact that, and I've said many times before that what this government want to do is to centralise all power to Whitehall and bugger what happens north of the Watford Gap. Equally that goes the same for Cardiff and the same for Stormont as well.
Chris, can I ask you a question? What I was going to say is nobody's mentioned this specifically today, not in Holyrood or anywhere else, but it occurred to me that this new United Kingdom internal market test that they want to put all Scottish legislation to could very well mean that a referendum on independence, for example, might have a deleterious effect on the British internal market, and therefore they might use that as a way to actually stymie the whole independence referendum.
Well, again, you might be correct in that assertion, Gordon.
Too far.
But, I would be interested in James's thoughts on this. James knows that I'm a self-confessed Republican. I want to see a socialist Republic of Scotland. I have long argued for the fact that our MPs should do the exact same as Sinn Féin and just go with a rule of non-compliance. They could enact that on the 31st of December because what is coming down the line at this moment in time will surely end up in the courts.
Well, possibly. I think most of us would hope that doesn't happen, Chris. Listen, before we get too far behind again, I would like to move on to our next story this evening. And actually talking about Jackson Carlaw resigning actually led me nicely into this story because this is about self-isolation. The self-isolation period has been extended to 10 days. The United Kingdom's 4 chief medical officers have extended the self-isolation period to 10 days for those in the community who have coronavirus COVID-19 symptoms or a positive test result. In symptomatic people, COVID-19 is most infectious just before and for the first few days after symptoms begin. It's very important that people with symptoms self-isolate and get a test, which will allow contact tracing. Evidence, although it's still limited, has strengthened and shows that people with COVID who are mildly ill and are recovering have a low but real possibility of infectiousness between 7 and 9 days after the illness onset. We've considered how best to target interventions to reduce the risk to the general population and consider at this point that in the epidemic with widespread and rapid testing available and considering the relaxation of other measures, it's now the correct balance of risk to extend the self-isolation period from 7 to 10 days for those in the community who have symptoms or a positive test result. This will help provide additional protection for others in the community, and it's particularly important to protect those who have been shielding and in advance of the autumn and winter when we may see an increased community transmission. Chris, I'm going to come to you first on this one. This came out of the blue a little bit for many of us, but the idea that if you're symptomatic, instead of staying at home for 7 days, you now have to stay at home for 10 days, they must think it's going to make a difference, or this surely would not even have been suggested.
Well, no, but then this is actually to do with the WHO guidelines, which the English government have finally adhered to, and possibly had they done this maybe, a month ago, it could have possibly saved quite an awful lot of lives. But at the end of the day, going back to what I was saying earlier about the fact that the government being run by a bunch of schoolboys, should I say public schoolboys, it clearly shows that there has been a lack of clarity and leadership from the Westminster government. And finally now they are actually listening to the World Health Organization with regards the treatment of people who are symptomatic.
Yeah. Oh, listen, Chris, if I could leave it there for the moment with you and bring in James. James, it struck me when I heard this that this is a measure which the UK government could bring in quite easily because it doesn't really cost them anything, does it?
Well, it's another 3 days that people are having to stay off work, but it seems like a sensible measure if there's scientific evidence that it looks like between 7 and 9 days that the people could still be infectious. Then I think it's an important thing to do. And I think one of the things that it does show, but is that the science that the four countries of the 3 countries in the Principality are receiving is the same, right? It's the political decisions that they make based on it. And I think what's happened is this time we've made the same decision, but in the past we've made decisions based on how we think is the best way to deal with it in Scotland. Down in England, they seem to rush to get things open quicker. They look like they're paying the price for that. And at this stage, we can't be blasé in the slightest about it, but at this stage we seem to be still doing the right thing and getting the results we deserve.
Okay. So I would like to move to our next story now, and the Treasury is planning to cut the furlough scheme and will cost thousands of jobs in Scotland. The UK government has come under renewed pressure to reverse its dangerously premature plans to cut the furlough scheme, furlough scheme support from this week, after new research revealed that more than half of the surveyed Scottish firms will be forced to make job cuts by the end of the year as a result. The research was published by the Fraser of Allender Institute for the Addleshaw Goddard Scottish Business Monitor, found that 12% of firms will have to make significant cuts to staff numbers, while 43% stated that they would have to make redundancies. The threat to jobs comes as the Treasury prepares for the first round of cuts to the job retention scheme on August the 1st, with the scheme being shut down entirely on the 31st of October. Which risks pushing people into hardship and abandoning firms who were struggling to stay afloat during the economic crisis caused by the health pandemic. The SNP has ramped up calls on the UK government to extend the income support schemes into 2021 and to introduce a financial package of at least £80 billion to deliver an investment-led recovery and to devolve financial powers to Holyrood so that it can ensure a strong and tailored recovery into the crisis for Scotland. James, the shutting down early of the job retention scheme was widely criticised at the time when it was announced, but now we're seeing some concrete evidence here from a respected organisation that it is going to have not only some theoretical consequences, but it is actually going to lose a lot of jobs. How much can the Scottish Government do you think, to try and ameliorate the damage that this is going to cause? Will they have enough left in the war chest to do anything about this?
It's very difficult to see how we can be paying out extra money to this, and at the same time be paying for all the other things that we're going to have to be doing. For me, it's a disaster in a number of ways, but it seems to me like a silly decision because, to be fair to the UK, the Westminster government, they borrowed a lot of money. The money has been spent wisely in terms of this furlough scheme, and then to cut it at this stage, and we're going to see the downside of it that we've been trying to avoid for so long, just seems to me counterproductive. I think that it's going to have a huge impact all over the UK. It's going to have a massive impact here in Scotland, and we've always known that there was going to be some really bad news coming out of this in terms of the economy. It couldn't be any other way, but to cut our nose off to spite our face like this is just, to me, insanity from the Westminster government.
Thanks, James. Chris, if I could turn to you. I read today, actually, from a website online that it's being thought that the Tory government is far too keen on prioritising debt repayment above actually protecting jobs. Now, I don't know about you. I know as a trade unionist, you must be very worried at the moment, particularly in your own industry, the aviation industry, which has seen severe problems recently. But for the job retention scheme to be chopped early, what effect will that have on your own members?
Well, I'm really glad that you brought that up because I was going to take you to a story with regard to the TUI group. People know them as Thompsons, and they've announced today the possible closure of up to 600 high street shops. You know, and they will no doubt point to the fact that the majority of business is conducted online these days. But you know, the more cynical could possibly look at that story and say, well, you know, they've managed to play the furlough game quite well by getting their money and stuff like that, and then by the same token, still pay their staff off. And I don't know what's more despicable, actually, you know, because the aviation industry is absolutely sickening me at the moment with the actions of British Airways, who want to pay off their long-time staff, who you know are on good money, and basically ask them to reapply for their jobs in a 25% upwards cut in their salary.
Yeah.
We discussed this before as well when I used to work for Safeway food stores. They paid off all the department managers, restructured, and then asked us if we would like to take a £10,000 pay cut and reapply for our jobs as controllers. So it's there are companies which are going to take advantage of this situation. But you know, I hate to point out, Scotland has offered to take a different approach. Kate Forbes has asked the UK government to devolve the powers necessary to us in order that we can borrow the money so that we indicatively in Scotland can extend the furlough scheme, you know, because we can actually see the storm coming on the horizon, and it defies logic as to why Richie Sunak won't entertain that, because at the end of the day, it's not Tory money.
No, it's not. It would be
money.
Well, there's another. Chris, if I could cut across you there just for a moment, it's also been pointed out by many economists that the cost of borrowing is so low in the world markets at the moment that the UK can easily borrow more than enough money to see its way through the entire crisis and still have basically enough in the bank at the end of the day because the interest rates are so fantastically low.
The point is that Rishi Sunak is not going to give us any powers to raise money at a time when the Westminster government are trying to take powers back from us. That it might well make economic sense, but that's not what they're interested in just now. What they're interested in is holding on to power and making sure that Scotland doesn't look as if they can do things differently and better, although unfortunately for them that cat's already out the bag.
James, is it true? I heard recently that Richie Sunak is planning to levy a new purchase tax of 2% on all goods that are purchased online because he's struggling to get any business rates from high street shops at the moment. Have you heard anything about that?
Well, the same as everybody else has, but I mean, to some extent that makes sense, because one of the reasons why the high streets are failing is because online premises have done so well, online premises, but the online companies have done so well. So if the high street shops and the shops and the big out of town arcade retail centres have to pay tax, then I think that it's only makes sense that there's an online tax as well. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. It won't be easy, and the companies will fight against it. But in this one, I'm not going to be arguing with them.
Okay, listen, thanks for that. I'm going to move to our next subject now, and that is the Social Justice Commission is to publish a report on secure income for all. The Social Justice and Fairness Commission has published the first in a series of discussion papers. The paper, A Secure Income for All, focuses on the work the Commission has undertaken to explore the principle of a state providing secure minimum income with more in-depth examination of universal basic income, or UBI. The Social Justice and Fairness Commission, led by Shona Robeson MSP and Neil Gray MP, has been discussing a range of proposals that will deliver a route map to the real prize of independence. The prize is a fairer Scotland that values and cares for everyone who lives here, from baby box to grave, and in which everyone can fully participate and have the opportunities they need to flourish. The discussion paper will form the basis of the SNP's online National Assembly next week, but it is also open to wider public comment. Shona Robeson MSP said, "I'm delighted to be publishing the first of the Commission's new discussion papers, which we hope will stimulate some really positive debate about how we could use the powers of independence to build a more socially just and fairer Scotland. This is the first in a series of discussion papers, and we'll be publishing more on a range of topics over the coming weeks and months." Chris, let's have your response to this. This, on the surface, on the face of it, seems a wonderful idea to get people to talk, first of all, about the idea of a universal catch-all income for everybody, regardless of what happens to them throughout their life. Surely this cannot be a bad thing.
Well, again, it will come as no surprise, to hear that as a socialist, I'm all for the redistribution of wealth. And my comrade George Kerrivan has done an extensive amount of work on UBI for Scotland, which everyone will benefit from. Everybody will be treated equally, and everybody will be treated with a bit of dignity and respect. It's not there. It's not designed to create a comfort net. It's actually there to create a safety net, and it does mean that if a UBI was introduced, it would involve a radical shake-up of the benefit system as we know it,
Yes.
which is pretty much ideal now, because Scotland doesn't have any control over the benefit system. With regards job seekers allowance, family tax credits, all the rest of it. We've only got 15% of the powers.
Yes, it's strictly limited, isn't it?
Yeah, but so the possibilities on this are absolutely endless. Again, I can just hear James revving up there and saying, "Aye, but Westminster will no gate to us." Do you know what I mean? Because they don't want us outshining them in any such way, shape, or form. But what has to take place is the fact that this discussion has to be carried out throughout the right-wing media in Scotland, so that the people know what the SNP are proposing come 2021, and why you should be voting for an SNP MSP in Holyrood to make sure that we can actually make the case for UBI in the first place.
Well, listen, I'd like to give James Donnan the chance to reply to some of your comments. James, what's your response to what Chris is proposing there?
Yeah, I wasn't really revving up. I was just moving forward, Chris. But I actually agree with a lot of what you say. I think that I'm a huge supporter of UBI, for example. I think that that's not just a safety net, it's a platform. And it's a platform for people to be able to take a chance and going into work, and even sort of lower paid work than they would normally do because they have that platform of the basic income there to make sure that they can pay their bills and have the basics foods in. So anything that they get on top of that is extra. And I think it's a great way to explain to the people of Scotland that this is the type of country that we want. So no, I think that the work that Shona and Neil and others are doing, it's going to be vital in the run up to the election. But more important than that, I think it's going to be vital for the people of Scotland, because I think that when we do become independent, and we'll become independent soon, that the people will know that this is the kind of country that we want to create for them. And this is the kind of country I believe that most of the people in Scotland want to.
Just before I leave this subject with you, James, there was one thing I wanted to get your comment on. It occurred to me while you were talking there, and while Chris was talking as well, that you would need to bring employers into this universal basic income scheme, because in the past it's been said that by giving too much benefit to people while they're working, we're actually encouraging the employers to pay lower wages. So surely there has to be some connection there between this platform, as you call it, and the employers of Scotland as well.
Yeah, of course there has to be. But I mean, remember, universal basic income is going to have to be paid for, and it's going to have to be paid for in some way. And so who's going to pay for it? Maybe it's the employers, maybe it's more tax. I have no idea. What I'm saying is that this is something that everybody has to be a part of this discussion.
Yeah.
Because we have to make sure that when we do it, it starts from the right place and that everybody's bought into it. Because surely employers can see the benefit of having people who will work, for a short period of time.
Because
a week, part-time a week, so that they can top up their wages and they can get the benefit of that at the same time.
Yes, but of course this means, I guess, James, this means that for once in people's lives, they're not forced to work. They're actually choosing to work, knowing that they are not going to be impoverished if they don't get into full employment straight away.
Nobody wants to be forcing anybody into work. I mean, I think that's kind of like the opposite of everything that I stand for. I believe that work is important, and it's important in lots of different ways, not just financially, but forcing somebody off of benefits into a job that's going to make them less well off, which has happened in the past, is not the way that this should be done. Universal basic income makes sure that sort of thing can't happen anymore. And that's another good reason why I think people should be supporting it.
So we need to make sure then, James, that the employers were paying a reasonable wage as well to begin with.
Well,
yeah.
We always want to see that. We always want, the employers should be paying people for the work that they do. They shouldn't be paying people for as little as they can get away with. And if we can all buy into the same thing, if everybody's part of the same process, then I think it's easier to make sure that the end result will be something that everybody can live with. And that is not like the minimum wage, where Labour were going to bring it in at such and such. Big business says to them, we can't afford that, and Tony Blair backed down. So I think it's really important that we set a standard and that we bring along businesses with us to make sure they understand the benefit of that standard. Okay,
well listen, thank you, James, for that. I'm going to move on now to the next story, which is actually, because of the way things have worked out this evening, about Dominic Cummings. And Dominic Cummings undermined lockdown enforcement, says the ex-Durham Chief of Police. Durham's former Chief Constable has warned that Dominic Cummings' lockdown behaviour has made it more difficult for officers to enforce the rules and has been used by some as an excuse for law breaking. Mike Barton said the decision by the Prime Minister's chief aide to drive to Durham at the height of the coronavirus pandemic had damaged the trust in the government and in the rules. After the trip was exposed by The Guardian and the Daily Mirror, Barton said people are actually using the word Cummings in encounters with police to justify antisocial behaviour. Speaking to Times Radio, he said, if the public don't think the police are operating in a fair and impartial way, you won't get their trust and you won't get their support. People who make the rules shouldn't break them, otherwise you can't expect the little people to do it. Barton, who retired last year after a 7-year stint running the force, also criticised Cummings' failure to apologise for his actions and the excuses he gave for them during the unprecedented Downing Street press conference. His barefaced effrontery in the Rose Garden was staggering, he said, Barton said Cummings' explanation for his trip to Barnard Castle was worse than childish. Now, I know, Chris, how you feel about Dominic Cummings, but what's your reaction to Mr. Barton's comments today? This just seems to confirm what everybody was thinking.
Well, it does, and I think by now, including myself, everybody's ran out of superlatives to use with regards to the Cummings debacle. And again, it's not more reflective of Dominic Cummings insofar as we all know that he's a complete psychopath. You know, who wants weirdos and misfits to be amongst his work colleagues. But what is more indicative of what I said earlier on is the fact that the UK government are so bereft of clarity and leadership that it allows people like Dominic Cummings to do what he had done, and I'm actually quite surprised that Barton's come out and said this, because it is slightly damaging to the way that Boris Johnson wants his government to be portrayed.
Yeah.
So they do say that any PR is good PR. I don't think that this is very good PR for the UK.
It certainly was not. James, if I could bring you in here, I mean, I'd like to just re-quote what the police chief had said. The retiring police chief, he said that Dominic Cummings displayed barefaced effrontery in the Rose Garden, and it was staggering. And Cummings' explanation for his trip to Barnard Castle was worse than childish. I mean, these are not the comments of a man who's pulling his punches, are they?
No, to be fair, but Cummings has got a record, hasn't he? I mean, he was meant to apologise to Parliament. He never did it. He's a man who spent 3 years in Russia. The Tory government are full of Russia money, and yet there's never they avoid investigating the Russian interference, possible Russian interference in the Brexit referendum. So Cummings has got a forum, let's say, but to be fair, somebody who can pretend to the police and others the only reason they did what they did was because they're big fans of Mr. Magoo and they wanted to take their car out for a drive. It deserves everybody's respect, and I have to admire him for that, if nothing else.
Yeah, I think so, definitely. He certainly gets a round of applause from me anyway. Now, bringing us up to the end of tonight's show, our final story this evening is of an ex-Tory, an MP, Charlie Elphicke, who was convicted of sexual assault. The Conservative ex-MP, Charlie Elphicke, is facing jail after being found guilty of 3 counts of sexual assault against 2 women in a verdict that prompted his wife, who represents his former constituency, to announce the end of their marriage. The father of 2 has represented the Kent constituency of Dover from 2010 until last year, has denied the 3 charges, 2 in relation to a parliamentary worker in 2016 and 1 in relation to a woman at his family's central London home in 2007. He lost the Tory whip in 2017 when the allegations were referred to the police, but was reinstated in December 2018 before a vote of confidence in the then Prime Minister Theresa May. Elphicke, who will be sentenced on the 15th of September, sighed and looked at his lawyer as the unanimous verdicts were returned. The judge, Mrs. Justice Whipple, said all options remain very much on the table, including the possibility of an immediate custodial sentence. Now, there are not many good things to say about a man who has been found guilty of sexual assault. Chris, in this particular case, the fact that his wife hung on so long and seemed to support him through his court case, that's quite remarkable. And now she's filing for separation and divorce.
Well, yeah, and I'm not going to cheapen this story with any sort of like slur and slander on the gentleman in question. Any crimes against women should be tackled by the full letter of the law, regardless of your status in society, regardless whether you're, a street worker for the Clenny or whether you're an MP in Westminster.
Yeah, you should be safe in your job, shouldn't you?
Yeah, of course. And what you can see is obviously an abusive position. Moreover than that, more despicable than that, he actually abused his relationship with his wife, and I can't honestly. These people need to be. I really hope that an example is going to be shown of this guy, because we need to be pointing out that in today's society, it is not acceptable to treat women with such disdain and lack of respect. It's absolutely shocking. And I mean, this is again, it's indicative not just of the Tory party, not just the Labour Party. I have to hold my hands up and say that it happens, obviously, within our own party. The biggest question here is the fact that justice needs to be done for these women, because
well, he has been found guilty, Chris, so it's really just a case really of what his sentence is. James, you've been waiting a wee while to comment on this. I must say, when I first heard this story, it immediately brought to mind the Alex Salmond case, which of course he was exonerated. This is the reverse this time. What's your reaction to this? I mean, the man was briefly had the whip withdrawn, and then he was reinstated. It seems an awful bit, really a mishmash of responses from the Tory party at the time of these allegations.
Yeah, the most important thing is that the woman that he assaulted got justice, right? That's the most important thing. But when we're looking at the politics of it, there's a couple of things that jump out at me. One is that issue that they took the whip off him until such times as it was useful for him to have it, and then they gave him it back so that he could vote, which is cynicism beyond belief.
Yeah.
His wife then becomes a candidate.
Yeah.
And takes the seat. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but that's certainly what I'm reading from the news that I've heard that today. Takes the seat that he stood in. That just seems to me, not quite right.
Opportunism.
And I understand why. Exactly. And I understand why she would have stood by him, because, at the end of the day, until the court case was over, at the end of the day, as the father of the children, wouldn't want to do anything that would make it look to the court as if they'd already made their mind up about that. So I get that. But the political opportunism, as you correctly call it, stinks for me in a number of ways. The way the Tory party behaved with the whip, the way that the wife became the candidate, and the fact that she's now the MP that he once was.
Well, listen, thanks, James. Now, at this point, I really will need to draw this programme to a close, since we have overrun a little bit and we were running late to begin with. So, of course, at this time in the evening, it's my custom to ask you for your help in funding more programmes for Scotland at 7, for Broadcasting Scotland, including Scotland at 7, of course. So if you would like to support Broadcasting Scotland by becoming a regular supporter and paying £5 a month, you can do so by following the instructions at the bottom of the screen, going to broadcastingscotland.scot/register and follow the prompts. That's about it from a very late edition of Scotland at 7. I will be back again next week, but from all of us here at Broadcasting Scotland, a very good night to you.
Thank you.
Okay.